If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
People, what's your creepiest, strangest, most unbelievable story that you haven't shared anywhere?
Years ago, 2006, I went on a date, and as we left the pub, I walked her home. This very polite man passing us said, "I hope you two had a great night." He looked familiar. We said, "Thanks," and as we turned to walk away, I said to her, "Oh my God, that guy had no feet." She wanted to say the same thing. That man was gone. There was nowhere for him to turn. He vanished, man. It's like his legs were sunk in the concrete of the pavement. Anyway, while flicking through a family album, this guy was on many photos wearing big lapel 70s bell-bottom jeans. It was my Uncle Tommy, who died in 1986. And as for the feet missing part of this, that road used to be a cobblestone road up until mid-1990s, when it was raised with tarmac and concrete. Extremely bizarre experience my dad had around 5:30 a.m. when he took our dog out. I'm just going to explain this like I'm talking through my dad since it's easier. So I wake up at around 5:30 a.m. to our dog throwing up and running her downstairs to let her out to go outside. As I open the door, she runs out and immediately starts growling. I'm telling her, "It's okay, go do your thing, go do it," and I kind of just freeze up when I see what she's looking at. It's this opaque white apparition, similar to an obelisk, blocky, about the size of a standard doorway. Probably about 30 feet away from the house. It was completely dark with no moonlight to cause such a vivid reflection off of anything, and this thing was visibly standing upright. It was immobile, so much so that the dog lost interest and eventually came back, but I was just stunned and freaked out looking at this thing. I didn't have the courage to step outside and inspect it. I went back upstairs and managed to go back to sleep. Anyone have any explanations or have had similar experiences? We were joking about how it was probably a doorway to another dimension. I woke up to all the commotion with the door opening and the dog growling, so my dad definitely wasn't having a lucid dream. I just wish he woke my ass up, but he didn't want to disturb anybody. My partner and I just moved into our first house together in March. He usually falls asleep before me. One night, while I was awake and lying next to him sleeping in bed, I noticed what looked like a dark shadow hovering above me, near our ceiling. I have a tendency to freak myself out, so I forced myself to ignore it before falling asleep. I also have really terrible eyesight, incredibly nearsighted with bad astigmatism, and without my glasses or contacts, I didn't necessarily trust that I was seeing things correctly. I kept thinking that I'd seen it on different nights after that. Again, I didn't trust my vision. One night, I was in bed next to Chris and looking up, and this ducking shadow thing suddenly appeared directly above me, about 3 feet from my horizontal body. It was a shapeless shadow, about my length, and it looked somewhat grainy, like static, and also a bit smoky in appearance, if that makes sense. An unbelievable sense of fear and panic came over me. I felt frozen by it. I fell asleep super quickly. It almost seemed like someone had flipped a switch and put me to sleep. In the following days, I mentioned that I had seen this thing to Chris. He is not like me in the sense that he didn't, believe in the paranormal. He's an amazing man though. He still heard me out and listened to me. A week later we are in bed, and he says, "I've seen that thing you talked to me about." I turn to him, and he looks almost ashamed but absolutely as if he is telling me the total truth. He tells me that he has seen this shadow hovering above my body, but when he focuses on it, it dips down lower and then sort of slides up over our heads and seemingly out the window. This is a man who does not believe in ghosts, paranormal entities, energies, etc. In fact, I said to him, "I thought you didn't believe in all that stuff." And he said, "I never had any experiences that gave me a reason to, until now." I'm sure this story is unbelievable if you were not there, but it happened and is in fact only one of many bizarre occurrences in my life. This one is significant though because my friend was there as a witness to back me up. When I was in 7th grade, my mom was transferred to Mobile, Alabama. My brothers and I used to skateboard, and we often skated at this concrete ditch a few blocks from my house. I estimate it was about 7 feet tall from the base of the ditch to the top at ground level. One day my friend Sam and I decided to follow the ditch into the woods to see where it led. We skated for quite a while along the bottom of the ditch, just following it as it went deeper into the woods and away from the houses. Eventually the ditch ended at a flat wall. There were 2 tunnels in the wall that continued forward. They were each maybe about 5 feet in diameter, with yellow horizontal bars in front of them. Well, the tunnels were pitch black, and both of us stood silently there, trying to decide if we were brave enough to climb the bars and continue forward into the tunnels. After maybe 30 seconds, we suddenly heard a voice coming from the right tunnel. "Come inside," it said. We were both scared and just frozen in place. Then more voices joined in. "Come inside. Come join us," along with the sound of a shrill kind of reed instrument. We did not listen to the voices but just stood there in place. Well, I guess these people realized that we weren't coming in, so they decided to come out. And the next part is pretty crazy. As we stood there, we saw 5 sets of glowing eyes inside that tunnel. They were moving up and down as though walking towards us. The glow was an intense whitish yellow. At this moment, there must have been a sudden break in my memory because the next thing I remember is 5 people standing in front of us outside of the tunnel. They appeared to be a family of 5, an adult male and female, along with 3 children. All of them were well dressed, blonde and blue-eyed, and each one had a bicycle. I don't remember them pulling their bikes over the yellow bars, which would have been kind of difficult. The man held out a small rectangular object in his hand. I couldn't recognize it. He said, "The next time you hear this, you'll know it's us." I'm assuming this was the instrument sound that was coming from the tunnel. Then they got on their bicycles and rode away. Sam and I talked about that incident for a long time. We of course corroborated everything that happened with one another, and I'm pretty certain that if he were not there, then I would have discounted most of this incident as imagination. Not sure where to research more about this. Hopefully someone here can point me in the right direction. My mom has been woken up twice now in the past year or so to a beam of light in her room. This should not be possible. She has electrical tape over any electronics that have a standby mode or other type of light on them, and she built solid wooden shutters and fitted them on the outside of the house, with insulation in between the shutter and windows, and they're latched shut. In addition to that, she has curtains inside to further prevent any sort of glow from getting inside. In short, at night, her room is pitch black. Last night she was woken up by a noise plus a rectangular beam of light, perfectly squared, about 2 feet long and 1.5 inches wide. It scanned over her nightstand and then across her head before just vanishing. Her sleep app shows she was awake at that time, so it wasn't a dream, and it happened right at 4 a.m. The noise she heard was her water bottle from the nightstand hitting the floor 6 feet away from where it had been sitting. Her glasses were also knocked to the floor, but they landed exactly by the bed. The TV remotes in between those objects had not moved. The first time this happened was about 6 to 8 months ago. That time, she was awoken by just the bright light on her face, and as she opened her eyes, the beam scanned down her whole body and then abruptly vanished that time as well. The light doesn't seem to light up the room. She described it as if the light was stuck to the bed/covers. It was dimmer the second time it showed up, but still very bright. Any ideas? About 10 years ago, in San Francisco, I had a surreal experience with a strange being. No drugs involved. I was walking by a Caltrain station and towards a grocery store. There is a highway ramp intersection that has accidents almost every day. This morning, I saw what seemed like an 8-foot-tall person walk across that intersection as the light changed. There was no way they were going to make it, and the car started forward. As I was staring, it was as if a field of some kind came up, and the cars were frozen in place. I could see the drivers behind the wheel, and their eyes were wide and their mouths open. I felt like I was caught in something and was moving in slow motion. The walker crossed easily and was moving towards where I was. For some reason, I stopped and decided not to get close to them. However, a couple walked past me, chatting and seeming oblivious to everything. The walker moved towards them, and as the couple turned, he saw it and jumped off the curb into the street. I was standing about 15 feet away, but I will never forget what it looked like. The head was waxy looking, 4 times the size of a human, and appeared to be melting. Cream colored with enormous eyes. I thought, that can't be real, but then I saw the eyes moving and knew it was real. It was in the 90s that day, and the figure was wrapped in layers of clothes, but all wrong. Imagine someone who never wore clothes or knew how to put them on, trying to wear them. Pajamas were wrapped around the head, and I saw very thin gray legs inside the sleeves of a shirt. The shirt was being worn as pants, and other things were wrapped like tourniquets. I caught the eye of him as he went by, and I saw immense fear. The thought screaming in my head was, that's not a human. The walker sped up, moved past the whole scene, and vanished over a hill. Traffic resumed, and the couple looked at me, like, WTF was that? I kept walking to the store. I don't know why I didn't think to follow it or something. It seemed better to move along. The figure doesn't fit any description I've ever read about. The traffic freezing was weird enough, but the bizarre figure made it all seem too much to comprehend. In looking back at the incident, I think I saw a non-human being trying to elude attention but failing miserably. This happened like 10 years ago, on a hill southwest from Barranquilla, Colombia. I'm skeptical about a lot of things, but this, I'm absolutely sure that what I saw there was real. I was camping with my Boy Scout troop in a not-so-friendly place, very hot, really rough terrain, awfully humid. Our troop was more like military service than scout life. It was kind of far away from the main road, and the main base was on a tree-covered hill. I think that could be worth noting that it is less than 5 kilometers from an indigenous sacred site known as the Sacred Territory of the Creator, Huwap Jor Huko, and probably it is a sacred site too. I don't know, since the tribes that inhabited the area were forced by the Spanish to abandon their beliefs, traditions, and language, so there's a lot of things we don't know about them, even I being a descendant of them. It was 3 p.m., we sent 3 people to do the dishes after lunch. There was a small lagoon 5 to 10 minutes downhill. It shouldn't take more than half an hour for them to be back. An hour passes, they haven't come back. Knowing them, surely they're just having a trivial and boring gossip conversation, but as a patrol leader, I have to call them back. They didn't respond to whistles, so I personally went downhill to find them. The way to the lagoon is mostly a 2.5-foot path between a steep hill and a dry river with dense vegetation and closed curves. I was walking carelessly until I noticed something behind a curve. At first I thought it was a really massive vulture, but I felt uneasy, so I started going back in silence until I stepped over a dry branch. After the crackling, that thing extended his wings, showing a very muscular humanoid back and then a head that watched me. Then it took off with a sound more like a helicopter than a bird. Nonsense. I thought there must be a rational explication. Maybe it was just my imagination. I arrive at the lagoon, and effectively, they were having the most boring and dumb of the conversations. I told them to pack everything and started going back to the campsite when all the troop came out of the tree-covered area. The lagoon is in a clear, and told me that I was taking too long too. My encounter with the Birdman shouldn't have taken more than 5 seconds, or so I thought. Anyways, there was a very cocky boy in the troop that said, "I'll go front," and entered alone to the woods. 5 seconds later I heard the same helicopter-like sound, and the boy came running from the woods, hyperventilating. "Scout, I saw a man with wings." Everybody lauded. I didn't say a word. This experience happened several years ago. A bit of background, I was probably about 20 to 21 and still living with my parents. Yes, so cool, I know. The reason I was still living with my parents was because I had had a serious drug problem for a solid couple of years of that time. I mention this because I believe it could be relevant to what I saw. Anyways, I was dating this guy Dan that had addiction issues like I do. Also, I mention this only because I think it might be related. However, we had both been clean in the months leading up to this night. So, back to the story. So, like I said, Dan and I had both kicked our habits for the time being and were clean and attempting to begin normal lives. However, in the days leading up to the night in question, things were starting to slip again. You know, a slip here, a slip there, but generally we were keeping it together. So, the day this happened, we had both finally fallen and relapsed together. This was pretty early in the day, if my memory serves me correctly, and trust me, I was into the drug I was into for a long time, and I assure you that I wasn't just tripping out or something. If any of you guys have been in the same position, you know what I mean by that. Anyways, tangents. Sorry. Okay. So, Dan and I had both finally ducked up. We were like, oh, whatever, no big deal, and went about our day. Around 6 p.m., we went to dinner. Upon arriving home, Dan didn't feel very well and went down to the basement to lay down and watch some TV. I stayed upstairs, talking to my mom, and then decided to take down some leftovers and hang with Dan. This is when I saw something I will never, ever forget. Carrying an armful of plates and to-go containers, I set to walk down the stairs to the basement. I take a step or two down the flight when I see a large, tall, black shadow in the doorway to the basement. I said something like, "Hey, Dan, can you help me with these?" Obviously thinking it must be him. I don't know how to explain it. The shadow had no discernible features, but I could feel it watching me. I just knew. I stared it down and took one more step down the stairs. I called out, "Hey." To no response. I just kept staring at it as it kept staring at me. Finally, I said, "Dan? Hello?" But it had already begun to sink in that whatever I was looking at was not my boyfriend. I blinked and blinked. This was no trick of the light or my imagination. I stared at this thing head on for at least 30 seconds. Then, suddenly, it just glided out of view. Glided is the only way to describe it, just a left to right glide. Still wanting to think it was Dan, I ran down the stairs, only to find Dan laying comfortably on the couch watching something on the TV. I remember saying, "Why did you ignore me?" To which he just kind of stared blankly and was like, what?" I then gave him the rundown on what I had just seen. It became very clear that it had certainly not been him. He had been on that couch since we'd gotten home. Needless to say, I was terrified to sleep that night. I don't tell people this story much. I am a logical person, doesn't everyone say that? But I know what I saw. The reason I mention the drug shit is because I've always wondered if the black mass is some kind of, dark being that people in bad spots in life draw to them. I've heard more than a few stories from others who describe the exact same thing to a T. The night I saw the mass was the first day of a relapse that would essentially send me spiraling into about 4 more years of addiction hell. That's why I wonder, that's why I think about perhaps it was something dark that Dan and I had unintentionally let in. I'm from a not wealthy, you could say third world country. It's not as awful as it seems, but not as developed as it should be. Several times a year, I visited my grandparents in the countryside. They had several cows, sheep, chickens, etc. regular stuff. My uncle, who is 6 years older than me, used to work as a shepherd. He was about 13 back then. So he invited me to look after sheep with him, and I took this opportunity as an adventure. Imagine a green place, surrounded by mountains and beautiful scenery. It was almost night time. We put the sheep in circle fencing, made a bonfire, and prepared to eat bread, jerky meat, and yogurt, and we started talking. You know, when you are young, in open space, at night you talk about scary stuff. Suddenly, another shepherd who was an elderly person joined us out of nowhere. We didn't mind, especially after finding out he had sausages and many other delicious things with him. Surrounded by a bonfire in fresh air with stars as visible as your palm of your hand. Unbelievable. Then this elderly person asked us if we believe in shaitan, the devil. I said yes, and my uncle said no. He then proceeded, about 2 months ago, I was herding my sheep. Usually, when you herd them, there are always goats in the front. They are like leaders of the sheep. They eat better grass, drink cleaner water, etc. He was explaining. My uncle said, those are obvious things. Why are you talking about it? He then said, one goat was acting weird, behind the sheep, never joined the other goats, and ignored any commands. Funny thing is, my dog and horse were acting as if the goat was a snake. They didn't come near it and tried to avoid it. So I got off my horse, looked closer at the goat, and realized this goat wasn't from my herd. What the hell, I said, and I tried to find any labels on it. Amazingly, this goat was white as snow and without any labels. Usually, sheep and goats have labels on their ears, like earrings. But when I tried to look even closer, it bit me. After that, I got angry and kicked it and lost consciousness. Everything was blurry, but I swear to God I saw the goat get up, shake itself off, and walk away on 2 legs. Nobody believed me, and it is kind of difficult for me to look after goats. I'm afraid of them. After his words, my uncle and I were shook. Like, WTF, why did you tell us this story before nighttime? We didn't sleep well that night and never came closer to the goats either. What do you think? Did he tell us the truth? Or was he under some kind of influence? This incident took place in a southern Indiana forest in the mid-1990s. I was out on a hunting trip with my family, but an early winter cold snap had dropped the temperatures into the single digits, so all of our friends declined to join us, and the woods were pretty empty. I had brought a nearly 100-year-old break-action shotgun that had belonged to my great-grandfather on the trip, and it was so old that it had an exposed hammer but no safety. That afternoon, I was scouting a new area for concealment in the leafless forest when a whirlwind gently whipping up some dead leaves from the ground about 100 yards away caught my attention. But after a moment I realized that the leaves and forest debris were shaped into a running man with moving legs and arms. The man's legs and arms appeared to be moving at the cadence of a normal run, but I realized that it was heading in my general direction with the speed and momentum of a truck on the highway. It was like it was going through the motions of running but actually rapidly gliding over the ground at a rate unrelated to what its legs were doing. Then I realized that the thing was traveling in a gentle arc right through my location. In the split second before it hit me, I decided to cock the shotgun and shoot it rather than attempting to leap out of the way. Maybe in the moment, my brain thought that the frozen ground wouldn't have given my boots enough grip to make that jump to the side. I expected it to feel like a slam to the gut when it hit me and knocked the wind out of me. But it actually felt like I was gently and progressively lifted up and back, like being lifted by an ocean wave just outside of the break.
In a split second, I was on my back and seeing only the sky through the barren forest canopy.
But what stood out to me in that moment was that I was not hurt at all. With the forest floor being frozen solid and strewn with rocks, I would not have been able to fall backwards onto it without hurting myself, no matter how hard I tried. My next impression was how normal everything seemed. There was no feeling of being threatened, rather, the forest felt, sounded, and smelled exactly like a winter forest should. Despite inspecting myself for the cuts and bruises that I expected to reveal themselves once the adrenaline wore off, I was very surprised to find absolutely nothing. I got back up and remembered that I should check my shotgun and found that I had gotten the shot off. But I felt like that had no effect on the incident. Everything felt so calm and normal that the only thing I was really thinking about was how to explain to my father why I had come back with fewer slugs than he had sent me out with. So, I apologize for that story not having any sort of satisfying payoff at the end. It was just a fleeting encounter that took probably only about 3 seconds from my pausing to observe the whirlwind to me ending up on my back. The thing that has really kept the memory swirling around in my head for so many years was how completely harmless the incident was, despite my inability to explain how it could have possibly happened without me getting hurt. Anyway, I hadn't told anybody about what happened until now, but I just wanted to share. I had a pretty scary experience back in the summer of 2012 with one of my ex-girlfriends. Earlier that day we had visited a friend of mine who was, and likely still is, into the occult and stuff like that. At around 2 a.m. that night, being skeptics, we decided to call on Baphomet, the half-human/half-goat devil entity/demon. Candles were lit, random things were said on obscure websites on the internet, and nothing initially happened. However, roughly an hour later, we both distinctly heard a car pull into the driveway at the front of the house. We heard men talking loudly and walking around on the gravel driveway. I was instantly scared as to what this was, but we both went to see whether someone had come to visit us or something. There was no one there. Driveway was empty. No one around. We then went back to the bedroom. We were laying on the bed when we both started seeing flashes of light and small, bright objects flying around near the ceiling. They changed from being bright in color to being absolutely jet black, and this was quite scary too. We were still watching the ceiling, and then something happened that really shook us both up. We both instantly averted our gaze to the open window, where we heard something walking around on the concrete patio in the garden. To give you an idea, imagine someone walking on concrete while wearing wooden clogs. I remember wanting to close the window more than anything, but I was frozen in fear because the walking sounded close by. We were both looking at each other in fear when we both heard the loud bleating of a goat. That was simply too much for both of us, and I remember working up the courage to quickly slam shut the window so we could hide under the covers. Just so you guys know, this was a pretty built-up area, and there were certainly no goats in the vicinity of it whatsoever. The next morning we found black marks on the ceiling of our bedroom, like someone had taken a black crayon and randomly drawn all over it like a young child would do. We checked the driveway CCTV too, and no one had visited our driveway all night. We also checked a different camera that covers a much wider area, and it was evident that no one had driven into our road all night either. I will remember this experience till the day I die. I vowed to never mess with the occult or anything like that again. A few years back, after a divorce, I ended up homeless and living in an RV caravan for about a year. I was offered a job 3,000 miles away from my ex, and it seemed like a good idea at the time, so my 2 small dogs and I started driving west. In western New Mexico, outside Albuquerque, we stopped at a native casino and RV park for the night. It was a very nice park. The bathhouse was huge and meticulously clean, the sort of place where tourists weren't allowed to feel uncomfortable while camping next to miles of wilderness desert in the middle of the reservation. I was just glad they didn't turn us out for being in a 40-year-old small RV, other parks had. Turns out RV living is only okay if it's obviously a choice instead of a need. The next morning, I checked outside my door before letting my 2 small dogs out. There are a lot of things that would be happy to snack on a toy poodle. Sure enough, a coyote was exploring the area. I'm used to East Coast coyotes that will take off as soon as they see you're a full-sized human. So I hopped out, left my pups locked up, and made sure I didn't make eye contact as I went towards the bathhouse. I nodded and greeted him politely as I went by. He was still there when I came out. I told him it would be appreciated if he gave us some space so my kids could come out for their bathroom breaks before we got back on the road. He huffed at me and started walking down the dirt road out into the bush. After a few steps, he turned and looked back at me, so I followed behind him by about 30 feet or so. Just for the record, following a coyote into the desert at dawn probably wasn't the wisest decision to make. I was very careful not to leave the dirt road. There was a natural clump of 3 boulders about 10 to 12 feet tall within easy eyeshot of the casino. The coyote calmly walked around the rocks. And then from the other side, moving at the same casual pace, came on an older native gentleman. His hair was in braids to his waist, he was wearing old jeans, a blue gingham shirt, and a woven hat. He tipped his hat at me and kept walking east out into the bush. That was when a raven I hadn't seen started laughing at me from the top of the tallest boulder. The bird took off, flying east, and in the light of sunrise seemed to shift from black to white to orangey red in color. I wished them both a kind day, hoofed it back to the park, and broke camp in record time. Ravens and crows followed me for the entire time I lived on the West Coast. Even when I would walk to work, there were 3 that paced me every day. Now that I'm back on the East Coast, I kind of miss them. I believe that I became friends with a reptilian couple. I don't even know where to start on this one. I'm just going to flat out say that even this title sounds insane. A few months back I started working with a lovely older lady who I'll call A. She was twice my age, and over our tenure together, she sort of became like a mother/sister figure. She was married to another lovely older lady I'll call N. They had been married for over 15 years. We became very good friends over time when we found out we were all interested in history. Well, I would have them over, and at some point we started talking about conspiracy theories. One thing led to the next, and I started talking about reptilians, but in a joking I hope they don't think I'm being serious but kind of am being serious way. It wasn't until then they started getting uncomfortable. Anne mentioned how she was a historian though and was telling me stuff about how the Roman Empire never fell and like the Tower of Babel type shit. Like almost as if she had been there. It was really strange, and something didn't feel right about how she was describing these historic events. Like me, typing this out doesn't do it justice at all. So they leave. Keep in mind this was the first time I ever had them over. Then the power in just my apartment goes out, and I get a call from A as soon as it goes out. A and N previously liked to prank call me before, but the timing was strange this time. Like they knew it was out. It seriously freaked me the duck out. Well, a month or 2 later, present day, I have just N over because she wanted to have discussions about Roman history and miscellaneous philosophy. Well, at one point out of the blue, she started talking about how her body temperature has always been that of what she referred to as a dead man and said that doctors were baffled by her anatomy because other than that, she was perfectly healthy and even had me touch her skin. I kid you not, she felt like she should have wrapped herself up in like 10 blankets. And then it seemed as though it wasn't her anymore. Like she was trying to tell me that she wasn't who I thought she was. But the weird part was that she seemed like even if she were reptilian, she was a part of this rare group of them that just wanted to live amongst humans. Maybe I'm not doing them any favors by making this post, and maybe I sound ducking crazy. But after she left, A called me and started talking to me about a magenta-colored UFO that appeared over their porch the previous night. And then she started going into explicit detail about what it was doing to her perception of time until I heard Ann in the background telling her to stop. And they sort of changed the subject with A saying something along the lines of "Ooh, don't you love my improv?" Leading into the next part of the convo. They then started joking with me and saying that they were aliens and that it didn't matter what I thought. But not in a condescending way, though. Like they were going along with a part. But also, they were really trying to tell me they weren't humans without actually telling me. I had this on my mind for a minute, so that explains why this got uploaded so late/early. Currently 3 a.m. here, I really just hope I'm ducking crazy. Please tell me I'm crazy. I'm a 39-year-old female, and this occurred, I think, a little over a year ago. This was a very real event. No drugs, no alcohol. I was in our bathroom, which has a line of sight out the back window to where my husband passes by before coming in the door. So, I was just doing my hair and looked over to see him outside the window walking up, switching the Kroger bag to his other hand to grab his keys, etc., then heard the door and watched him walk by the kitchen. I said "Hey baby," and he didn't hear me, not surprising, his hearing isn't the best, but I heard him lay the bags down, then lay his keys and wallet down. So I stuck a clip in that last bit of hair to do, and I started out the bathroom door to go give him a hug/kiss. Well, here it is. Instantly, when I walked outside the doorway of the bathroom, everything was completely different. All the lights were out, and they had certainly been on a moment prior. Totally weirded out, I felt shaky and whatnot, but I guess managed to walk a few steps to look toward the kitchen, only to see my husband wasn't even there. Then, before I even had time to attempt to process what the hell just happened, I saw through our kitchen window, his headlights coming down the driveway. It was then I started getting extra weirded out and for sure had to sit down. I remember I propped myself up sitting on the edge of the couch arm, and the next part is what freaks me out the absolute most. I couldn't believe my eyes at all, as I watched him walk across that window. It was like someone had just literally rewound a tape and was replaying it. The exact same motions, the same exact sounds. All the way through, including him setting the keys and bags down. The only thing I could think at that point is how crazy I would actually sound if I told anyone this, except told my husband right when he got there. So, I just want to know if anyone has any ideas of what happened. I'm open to hearing about it. It's the single most unbelievable, existential type thing that's happened in my life. I will never ever forget it. Thank you, anyone who bothered to listen/respond. My sister and I visited a town that wasn't there on a road trip once. I don't even know what state we were in at that point. We were somewhere in that giant desert that covers most of New Mexico through SoCal, driving across the country. Hard to know where because there was just nothing on that stretch of highway. Just 2 lanes in the desert that stretch on for hours and hours. The kind of place with signs warning you to get gas because the next station isn't for 200 miles. Anyway, we'd been driving all day, and the sun was getting lower, so when we saw an exit coming up, we figured we'd better take it, right? Not likely to get another chance for a while. We pull off and go around this little hill so we can hear the highway but not see it, and pull into this little town. At first, we didn't think much of it. It's just nice to see lit buildings, honestly. But as we start looking around for a motel, I realize something's weird. There are lit buildings, sure. But there aren't any people. No one on the sidewalks by the parked cars, not even servers in the lit diner, no shopkeepers visible in the windows, no one. Which, weird. But it's getting later, and I've been in a few towns where the sidewalks roll up early. Then I look at the cars and buildings themselves. And they're weird. It's normal for small towns to be old-fashioned, but these weren't run down, like the cars and buildings were old and just kept up. They looked like brand new, just in the style of the 1950s. The cars all looked like antiques that had been perfectly renovated. The buildings were all done up in that style. It was like being on a movie set. And it's still totally empty of people. Eventually we found a motel. We walk into the lobby, doors open just fine, all light up. Still super 50s style. The desk had an honest-to-God rotary phone on it and a paper ledger next to the till. And there's no one here. We look around some, wait a while, call hello, nothing. Finally, I was like, this place is too weird. I feel like if we slept here, we'd never get back out. So we got back in the car and left. Now this town, like a lot of small towns off the highway, had basically one main road that made a loop, connecting to the highway on both ends. We got off going north, looped east, went back south to get on the highway, and started driving west on the highway again. So we should have seen the exit we took to get into the town in a few miles at most, right? Nothing. We drive about 10 minutes, and there are no exits. We figure maybe we got turned around and missed it. Not like there were other cars on the highway, so we just flipped a U and went the other way for a half hour or so. No exits. We flip around and try again. It's a 2-lane highway in the middle of the desert, and it's getting dark. If nothing else, we should see a lighter sky in the direction of town. We see no hills, no lights, and no exit. Nothing. Eventually we just slept in the car. I still have no idea what went on that day. Saw a humanoid. My partner saw it too. This was about 7 years ago. We were sitting on our 7th floor balcony in the evening. It was still light out, and an 8-10 foot tall, skinny, gray humanoid with a large head and mantis arms was walking down the sidewalk. We both looked at each other and said at the same time, "Is that an alien?" We had a super long balcony, so I went to the corner closest to the sidewalk, crouched down, and watched it as I walked by. Its large head was facing down towards the sidewalk, and the mantis arms were holding something up to its head, as if it were eating something. It was ducking terrifying. My partner didn't get as close of a look, and he wanted to run downstairs to get a closer look. I refused. I think it might have been eating an animal or a person. But I couldn't tell. It was really weird because people and cars regularly passed by because we were in a densely populated area. No cars or people were around when we saw it, and it was strangely silent. When I was a teenager in the late 80s, me and 2 friends were at our local neighborhood pool. It was late afternoon towards the end of summer, and nobody was at the pool except the 3 of us. There were no lifeguards. The pool was completely fenced in with a tall, probably 10 to 12 feet tall, chain-link fence, and the only way to get inside was through a keypad door. 2 of my friends wanted to smoke weed, but I wasn't interested, so I just swam. After we had been there maybe an hour, my friends were on the deep end of the pool, one of them swimming in the deep end and the other standing around by the deep end. I swam underwater with my eyes closed from the deep end all the way to the shallow end. While I was swimming, I thought I felt like I was swimming by someone. You know that feeling when swimming underwater where you can definitely feel like you are swimming next to someone? Anyway, I didn't think much of it. I figured my friend who was swimming was deciding to race me or something. I came up at the end of the shallow end of the pool, and right after I emerged, I felt someone tapping me on my right shoulder 2 or 3 times. I turned around and saw nobody there, and there was no way it was someone standing in front of me by the pool who reached over and tapped me. Before I said anything about it, in fact, this was right after I had turned around after being tapped on the shoulder, I noticed my friend who was in the water at the deep end still there, being helped out by my other friend who was still standing on the outside. They both had very concerned, serious looks on their faces. Before I said anything, they noticed I had surfaced and asked me, "Did you see it?" I responded, "See what?" I thought I swam by something, and something just tapped me on the shoulder. "What's going on?" Their eyes got bigger than I had ever seen, and they both started screaming at me to get out of the water. They started telling me what they saw. My friend who was standing around said he saw a dark shape swim right past me when I was swimming underwater to the shallow end of the pool, but they couldn't make out who or what it was. They thought maybe it was an animal. Well, of course I got right out of the pool myself. We gathered our stuff and booked it the hell out of there. Keep in mind that at least one of my friends was outside of the pool at all times. They were smoking weed and were incredibly mindful of anyone who may be approaching the pool. There was definitely nobody already at the pool when we got there. We always cleaned up stuff people earlier in the day had left and put it by the benches near the front of the pool. One final strange thing is that there was a small pair of swimming shorts at the end of the shallow pool, on the concrete area outside of the pool, that we didn't remember seeing. Remember, we always cleaned up before we started swimming. We only ever talked about this experience in hushed tones after that day. I have thought about this event many times in my life, and for the life of me, I just cannot come up with any rational explanation for what happened. I can't see how they pranked me, or someone else pranked us. There is no way I just imagine what happened. Remember, they saw something too and were already freaking out before I had said anything to them. I've never experienced weird shoulder tapping like that, so it's not like I have muscle spasms or some psychological condition that makes me believe I feel neck tapping when it's not happening. My shoulder wasn't cramping, etc. It was definitely a shoulder tap like I've felt from people tapping me on my shoulder my entire life. Ghosts? Aliens? Someone with a neat invisibility suit in the late 80s? Who knows? Out to buy necessities only to be transferred to an unfamiliar place. I don't know if it fits the criteria, but I had this creepy experience back when I was a child. So a little bit of context, in the Philippines, there's this thing we call aswang. It's Filipino folklore pertaining to mostly anything shape-shifting creatures of the dark. This entity preys on the living, from livestock to humans. They fed off human flesh, specifically kids or babies. We have a term here called napaglaruan, or simply played at. This term is used when a person or group of people is being disoriented, puzzled, mystified, or simply gets lost on an otherwise familiar route. Anyway, this happened to my mom and me way back in 91-92 when I'm still around 2 or 3 years old. This is according to her recollection of the events that happened at that time. We lived on the poorer side of the neighborhood. 1 in every 5 houses is made of scrap wood, plywood, and roof sheets. This is an important detail in the story. One day around noon, we go towards the deeper part of the neighborhood to purchase rice and other daily supplies from one of her friend's stores located there. Halfway through her walk, she turns into a corner, and my mom, with me clutched in her arms, starts to notice something strange. The surroundings changed. It transforms into a place she's unfamiliar with. The once run-down, cheap-looking houses made up of scraps turn into one of those old Spanish-style houses that has marble balusters covered in moss. One look, and you can see that those houses have been battered through time. Tall trees aligned both sides of the once narrow trail, now transformed into a long, wide road covered in shade. The once hot summer noon eerily feels like the cold wet season. Every now and then a little breeze makes the trees sway, creating a creepy vibe. Dread slowly creeps in. My mom turns and turns, but everywhere she looks, she only sees old, tall trees and those dreaded old Spanish houses with those creepy moss-covered marble balusters. She instinctively tightened her hold on me, afraid that I may be snatched away from her. My mom continuously walks for what she feels like almost 20 minutes. Then, as my mom is slowly losing her wits out of nowhere, a tall, well-built man appears and starts walking towards us. As they were about to pass each other, the guy accidentally, or, should I say, luckily, bumps into my mom, causing her to regain her focus. She frantically grabs onto him and hysterically asks the guy, "Sir, excuse me, as I seem to be lost. Can you show me the way out of here?" To which the guy bewilderedly answered, "Yes, ma'am. It's just here," and just points towards my mom's back. Upon turning back, my mom is shocked, relieved, puzzled, and just plain scared to see that we had just taken 3 steps after turning the corner earlier. When she turns around again, she is scared witless as everything in her surroundings returns to its original appearance. All the houses were made of those familiar, cheap-looking scrap materials. She immediately thanked the guy and swiftly turned around, walked faster than she usually does, and went back. Upon exiting there, she hurriedly goes straight to the house of my older sister's previous daycare teacher at the entrance of the narrow alley. My mother told her the entire experience, and she responded that we may have been played at, Napaglaruan. It was then that she learned that there's an open secret that one of the residents there is an Asawang, and it's not the first time that this incident happened. Thankfully, we were able to get out of there in one piece, and thank you to the guy that we bumped into, for if not for him, we may not be here anymore. It's still baffling to me to suddenly appear in an unfamiliar place just by walking without you noticing. Again, I don't know if this experience fits the criteria, but I just want to share our experience here. Take this story with a grain of salt, as it does sound pretty unbelievable, but my father does claim that his great-aunt is a shapeshifter / someone who can become an animal. So first, I do want to say that native families are a bit confusing, at least in my tribe. They never really had words for, say, cousins or cousins from another family or stepfathers and such. Just father, sister, father, mother, grandmother, grandfather, those kinds of things that are super simple, so the use of aunts, uncles, and cousins is only now being used, and even then you can have multiple mothers, fathers, grandmothers, and grandfathers because, again, there are no real words for stepfamily, so they just call each other mother or father, etc. For example, I have 3 grandmothers. There are all 3 sisters by blood, and only one is my direct grandmother. If you're still confused, I kind of still am, but hey, it is what it is. Anyway, back to what you actually care about, the shapeshifter. Before my father left Oklahoma, he'd live with his mom and father and occasionally with his other family in Carnegie. It was either the family in the town or outside in the woods. Very few times he'd be with his family outside the town and would usually refuse to want to go. It was a couple of cabin houses, and it sucked having to stay there, he told me. But being so young, he'd usually have no say. His great-aunt and cousins lived there from his mother's side. The great-aunt was very old, being 76 at the time. She only got up and was about to cook, clean, use the restroom, and go to bed. Even then she'd have trouble using a cane to get around. She was also obese, which didn't help with her age and moving around. She'd spend most of her free time sitting down, knitting, and making quilts. One night my dad asked her if he could go out in the woods to walk around, but because it was so late, she didn't let him. He asked her why, and she said there are wild animals and spirits in the woods that could hurt him after dark. My dad wasn't too convinced at the time, as he never believed any native legends or supernatural things, so he just figured she didn't want him to get attacked by a wild animal. But his cousins had overheard what was going on, and the older ones who were her grandkids said that she was very serious about the matter. They shared stories of creepy things happening in the woods after dark and even during the day. They told him that even if he ever went into the woods alone during the day to stay alert because spirits there can cause you to get lost and to go home if you hear silence in the woods. Nature knows when something unnatural and supernatural is around, so all the animals and even the wind in the trees will go silent. They told him that animals in the woods aren't always animals and are, in fact, people unable to become humans again. After telling him that they let it slip about the ant being a shapeshifter. She didn't deny it and said it was true but rarely became one because she never needed to anymore. Not convinced, my dad and his cousins asked her to prove it. She agreed and said she'd show him in the morning. Morning came, and of course they again pressured her to show them. She agreed and made everyone leave the cabin. She told him to wait out there for 1 minute and to go to the other cabin, and she will be there. So they left and stood between the cabins for 1 minute. While they waited, my dad said he saw a rat about as big as an eggplant run across the small field between the cabins. After he saw it go to the cabin, he ran in and saw his aunt sitting in a chair, chuckling and clasping her hands. His other cousins, who didn't see the rat and also weren't her grandchildren, still didn't believe her and asked if she could do it again, and she did. She told them the same thing, stand outside for a minute and come to the other cabin. So they did, and when my dad saw the rat, he pointed it out, and everyone saw it go to the other cabin. Heading back to the cabin she said she'd be in, she was there, in a chair, chuckling again. Maybe she was pulling their legs, but he claimed there was absolutely no way she could have gone from one cabin to the other without being seen. You see, the cabins they stayed at were built in a big field surrounded by woods, and the field was flat and open. If anyone or anything went across the field to the other cabin, you would most definitely see it. Now do I believe it? Maybe I think she was a skinwalker? No. I know hearing this you'd think that because it's a native person becoming an animal, but my dad said these things were just as normal as someone having a different gene trait. Like some people have different looking feet and faces, and some people in the Kiowa tribe can become animals. Just normal to them, I guess. I'd have to see or experience it to believe it honestly, but if I were in his situation, I'd believe it. In April 2011, A friend and I were stargazing on my roof on a dry, clear night in New Jersey. We were observing the Lyrids meteor shower that wasn't producing as many shooting stars as we had hoped, but we stayed up there, intensely focused on the sky to see one every few minutes. After a couple hours of this, we caught a bright light in our peripherals. We turn around and see what looks like a bright blue-white LED flashlight traveling in the forest behind the house. At first instinct, we thought it was the police with a flashlight chasing someone, but then we realized that the light was up in the treetops, weaving through the canopy. All we could say was "WTF is that?" over and over again as it got closer to us. It was traveling along the direction of the river behind our house and seemed to notice us because, as it passed the back of my house, it slowed to a gentle stop, then took a 90-degree turn onto the clearing of our property about 40 feet from us, coming straight towards us. As if it had noticed us and wanted to check us out. This is when we got our first really good look at it. It was a perfectly defined glowing sphere of light the size of a basketball with what seemed like churning/flowing plasma inside. Icy blue/white hue emitting absolutely no sound at all. We started screaming at this point. As it approached, it moved very slowly compared to the pace it had traveling through the trees. It seemed almost cautious in its movement. It's weird, but you could sense some form of intention or intelligence in its movement. We were horrified because we knew nothing could explain what we were seeing. And we weren't about to duck around and find out by letting it get any closer. We scrambled off the roof and ran inside, hiding under a blanket like scared little children, even though we were in our late teens. We didn't talk about it much after that because we just couldn't explain it. About a year later, one of my neighbors is banging on my door, telling me to let him in. He told me that he and a friend were down by the river in that same patch of woods and were chased by a floating silent light ball. This freaked me out because I knew he was telling the truth. I had never told him the story of my encounter. The time I saw a goblin in the woods. With deer hunting season coming up in the state I live in, I am reminded of a spooky event that happened to me last season. It was the last day to hunt, and my brother and I hadn't gotten anything yet. We went out around 2 p.m. to try and get lucky and bag something. My brother dropped me off near my hunting spot and then took the truck and drove about a mile down the road to his spot. Usually we would meet back up where he dropped me off at about 5 p.m., but since this was the last day to hunt, we were going to hunt the maximum amount of time available. 30 minutes after sunset. After he dropped me off, I made sure I had everything that I needed and proceeded into the woods. The region I live in is notorious for very dense brush and vegetation, as well as very steep hills and loose rocks. Not the easiest to move through. I make it out to my spot and begin the waiting game. I had been tracking a deer all season, trying to get a clean shot at it. It finally presented itself to me, and I was able to make a clean kill on it, and then I began the process of field dressing it. After I had finished dressing the deer, I decided I didn't want to try and drag this deer out while carrying my backpack and my rifle, so I walked back to the meeting point and hid my gun and bag in case someone drove by and saw my stuff. I then walked back into the woods to drag the deer. Here is where it starts to get spooky. I had walked this trail that I had created every day for the past 2 weeks. In the morning before the sun rose in near complete darkness with no flashlight, and right as the shadows got long and the sun set. Not once did I feel any sort of fear. This time was different. I don't know if it was because I didn't have the safety net of a gun or what, but I felt like I was in danger. I returned to the deer and began to drag it out of the woods. Over logs and rocks, through dense brush. I had to take breaks every 50 yards or so to catch my breath, and when I would, it would feel like I was being watched by the entire forest. After I dragged the deer about 500 yards through the forest and got back to the meeting point, I felt mildly relieved. I now had my gun back and was in the relative safety of a small clearing. There was only one problem. It was only about 3:30 p.m. My brother wouldn't even be leaving his spot until 5:30 p.m., then he would have to walk back to the truck and drive back to me to pick me up. No big deal, I thought. I'll just sit here and wait. I sat down on a small stump and waited for a while. The whole time was uneasy. In the distance I could hear leaves crunching, but after being in the woods as much as I have, you can generally tell what animal is making those sounds. These sounded like they were squirrels. I went back to my phone until a few minutes later I realized they had stopped. Then I noticed there were no sounds. No birds, no wind, nothing. I sat nervously and listened very closely. Until I heard footsteps, heavy ones, coming from behind me. I didn't turn around yet in case whatever it was didn't know I was there since I am still in full camo. My first thought was a black bear, but as I focused on them, they seemed too deliberate to be an animal. That sounds strange, but it sounded exactly like a person walking through the woods at a somewhat slow pace, but not trying to be stealthy. I thought maybe it was another hunter that maybe got lost and needed help, so I stood up and turned around to talk to them. Except the footsteps stopped, and there is nothing there. At all. I stood and watched for what felt like 30 minutes and never saw or heard it again. So I sat back down with my back to that direction again and went back to my phone. Terrible horror movie instinct, I know. It wasn't 2 minutes later when I heard them again. Except this time, they were running straight at me. I jumped up, spun around, raised my gun, and flipped the safety off. All in one fluid motion. Adrenaline had completely filled my body, and I was ready to fight. As I turned around, I saw something very fast and maybe 3 or 4 feet tall run into a small upturned tree root hole out of my sight. I have no idea what it was. I stood there with my rifle shouldered for a while before I built up the courage to approach the upturned tree. I very slowly and quietly walked up to it with my rifle aimed and ready to fire. Just as I was about to see into the hole, I realized I had been holding my breath, so I exhaled and took a deep breath. I peeked into the hole, and there was nothing in there. There was nowhere for it to go. I hadn't taken my eyes off of where it went the entire time, and there were no tunnels or exits of any kind. Just a hole where a tree root had been. So now my pants are nearly full, and I have no idea what to do. So I quietly back away and stand there with my gun held up for at least an hour. Until the next problem came. The sun started to go down. I knew I would have at least 30 minutes of complete darkness out here alone. So without lowering my gun or taking my eyes off where I last saw this thing, I take my flashlight out of my pack and hook it onto my coat. It's an L-shaped one like the army uses. Fortunately, nothing else happened until my brother showed up and saw me out there looking like a crazy person, but as they all say, I know what I saw. 2 strange occurrences I've had. Anyone else have similar stories? So I've had a few weird things happen to me throughout my life, but only 2 have stuck with me heavily. They are not as crazy as seeing ghosts, UFOs, or aliens, but still strange. The first event happened my first year of college. I went to a medium-sized, semi-rural college in Pennsylvania and was getting ready for the last of my finals. My biology final was that afternoon, and I was feeling pretty confident. I had about 30 minutes before the test, so my roommate and I decided to drive to the gas station and back so I could grab an energy drink and some cigarettes. Now the gas station was only 2 miles away, about a 5-minute drive down a straight road with no turns, and I have made the trip about 100 times. My roommate and I got checked out and started driving back on the same road we drive every day. We started bullshitting on the way back, so we weren't paying the most attention to our surroundings. Less than 5 minutes later, I started to realize I didn't recognize the landscape. Normally we would be going by the sports fields by now, but I didn't see any of them. When I asked my roommate what was going on, he had no idea, thinking maybe I turned down the wrong road. We made no turns. I pulled out my GPS on my phone and routed us back to campus only to find that we were over 30 miles away, a 45-minute drive. I can't remember the exact mileage but remember the exact travel time. Somehow we were miles away where it would take 45 minutes to get back, just after a less than 10-minute drive. I was panicked because my final was in about 20 minutes and there was no way I could make it on time. I ended up being 25 minutes late, showing up with no pencil, and thank God, my professor still let me take the test. I got an 88%, which I was happy with and also proves I wasn't going mentally insane. To this day I still don't have an explanation. If I were alone, I would have thought I was going nuts. I've heard of missing time incidents, but in my case I didn't have any missing time, just missing distance. Almost like we were teleported or accidentally went through a wormhole. The second even happened a few years later. I was on vacation in the Poconos Mountains, where my family rented a little cabin in the middle of the woods with no other people around. One night I was out in the hot tub alone at about 2 a.m. before I went to bed. I was looking up at the clear autumn sky to stargaze and started to quietly talk to myself about space, aliens, gods, and UFOs. Kind of foolhardily, I said aloud, I really want to know the truth, I am ready. As soon as the words I am ready left my lips, about 30 to 40 meters out into the forest, an intensely bright all-white light, not the bluish tint LEDs have or the yellowish regular lights do, about the size of a basketball illuminated out of nowhere. Like I said, it was super late, in the middle of the mountains, with no other neighbors around. It shined for around 5 to 10 seconds, then faded quickly away. Unfortunately, the surprise and timing scared me so much that I was indeed not ready. I sat there for another 5 minutes and didn't see or hear anything else before finally going back inside. So those are the 2 strange events I keep thinking about, and these were years ago. I would love anyone's input as to what you think this could have been, or just similar stories. Strange experience in Montauk, mind control. This experience took place in the summer of 2010 at Camp Hero State Park just outside Montauk, New York. The park is the epicenter of a conspiracy theory about an alleged mind control program called the Montauk Project. At the time, I was heavily into the topic, and I happened to be visiting New York City, so I took the chance to drive out to Montauk one Sunday afternoon to check out the site where this was all alleged to be happening. So I drive out to Camp Hero State Park and park my car in an empty lot. The park is heavily wooded, and I can barely see the radar tower poking up in the distance over the tops of the trees surrounding it. The tower building is alleged to be over top of an underground base where the mind control experiments supposedly take place. This underground base is, according to the conspiracy theory, connected to New York City via an underground tunnel that links into the NYC subway system. They apparently use it to abduct subjects off the streets and bring them out to the underground base at Montauk, where they become subjects in the experiment. I don't want to go into too much detail about the Montauk project itself, since there's tons of info on the internet about it for anyone who's interested. But there are a few other important points to make before I get into what happened during my visit. 1. Camp Hero State Park is extremely isolated. It's a few miles outside of Montauk at the eastern tip of Long Island, and the only way to get there is via a winding 2-lane highway. 2. There were no electrical wires or any other signs of utility infrastructure anywhere near the park. 3. There are no houses or residential areas of any kind anywhere near the park. Anyway, I get out of my car and head up the only visible path leading in the general direction of the radar tower. It is a narrow path bordered on both sides by thick brush. I walk for about 5 to 10 minutes, noticing creepy signs about possible undetonated military ammunition along the barbed wire fence bordering both sides of the path. There are landmines in the site, left over from the Cold War. This particular AFB was thought to be vulnerable to a possible Soviet invasion. So I walk and walk. All the while, the tall grasses along the path kept rustling. Probably animals, but it's contributing to an overall feeling of uneasiness that is heightened by the fact that I haven't seen another living soul the whole time I've been in the park. But whatever. I drove 3 hours to get here, so I'm going to explore. Finally, I catch sight of a person coming toward me on the path. We meet up, and the guy says hi to me. I say hi back, and he asks what I'm up to. Not in a weird way, he was just being friendly. I said I heard a lot about this place and was in the area, so I thought I'd check it out. He says, "Have you heard the stories about the Montauk Project?" I reply that I have and ask if he thinks they're true. The guy just chortles and says, "If I were you, I'd be out of here before the sun goes down." And he just walks away. Weird. But it was mid-afternoon and a long way until sunset, so I just pressed on. Finally, I come to a path that branches off in a perpendicular direction, seeming to lead straight toward the radar tower. I follow it. I go deep into the woods, becoming acutely aware of how alone and totally defenseless I am, and I start wondering if there might be any dangerous wildlife around. I'm about to turn back again, but decide to keep going. Then, I detect a weird, unnatural sound. I stop and listen, hearing this continuous electrical kind of whoom 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 noise. I realize I'm hearing generators. But why are there generators out here in the middle of nowhere? Nobody lives here. There's nothing here but a thick, wild forest and an abandoned Air Force base. Very odd. I decide to continue and find an overgrown, unused road running through the forest. It leads to the radar tower, which is now visible at the far end. I only make it a few steps up the road before I see a message painted on the pavement in large yellow letters. No trespassing. Restricted area. There are no barriers to stop me, but remembering that there are landmines here, I decide not to press my luck. I'm about to walk away, then turn back. Should I go? Who would stop me? No, I can't. I shouldn't mess around. Should I? Back and forth I go, walking up to the warning, stepping past it, retreating, stepping past it, retreating. This is, I think, an important detail. A few steps up from the warning sign is a weird symbol spray painted onto the pavement. I took a picture of it with my old cell phone, but that phone has long since died, so I have to describe it. The symbol seems to show a human figure in some kind of gas mask or space helmet, with an arrow pointing to the right. I go to the right. It leads only to an abandoned barrack with bricked-up windows and no entryway that's buried in a small clearing behind some trees. Remembering stories that these buildings supposedly contain hidden elevators that lead down to the underground base, I decided it's time I listened to my gut and got out of there. I retrace my steps, passing the whoom 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 generators again. I couldn't actually see them, I could only hear them, and the forest was too thick to go look for them. I make it back to the main path where I encountered the local who warned me and go back to my car. I'm about to drive away when I realize I haven't even had a good look at the radar tower I came out here to see, and I spot this hidden driveway that I hadn't noticed on my way in. I decide to drive up. As it happens, the road leads straight to the radar tower, which is fenced off with barbed wire. I get out of my car and start taking some pictures with my cell phone when I hear another car pull in behind me. It's a New York State trooper. He pulls up closer and just stares at me from behind his aviator sunglasses. I find this extremely weird. There's nobody out here. Nobody. I've seen one person in about 2 hours, and my car was the only car in the lot. Nobody else has seen me. Maybe they do routine patrols because of all the urban legends, but I find it beyond coincidental that a cop would happen to show up on the trail of a guy who was poking around the restricted area only a few minutes earlier. My personal crazy theory, I was being monitored from the underground base via my cell phone signal. They could see that I was thinking about passing into the restricted area because I kept coming up to the no trespassing sign and walking away, coming back and walking away, so they had a cop come out to check into me. The cop is now sitting and staring at me, not saying or doing anything else. On the outside, I stay calm. I tell myself, you're not doing anything wrong. This is a state park. You're not inside a restricted area. You're taking pictures in a public place. That's it. But inside, I'm freaking out. Between the guy's weird warning and the generators and the weird symbols spray painted into the pavement and now the cop showing up, I've had enough of this place. I get in my car and drive away. The cop follows me. I stay calm, get back on the 2-lane highway, and follow it back to Montauk. The cop follows me the whole way, finally letting me go when we reach the city. I have no idea what is going on at that place. I went out there thinking these stories were likely just urban legends, but came away absolutely convinced that there is something happening there that people aren't meant to know about. When I was 16, I became a dementia care worker, making me one of the youngest in the country doing so. I come from Scotland, and the legal age of adulthood here is 16, so working more adult jobs at that age isn't uncommon. Unlike more care homes, the one I worked in was actually a renovated mansion. It was originally a regular care home, but by some strange decision it was decided that it would take dementia patients too, which was honestly a horrible choice. The regular doorways could hardly fit our equipment, and there was basically no room for the things we had to do in bedrooms for some patients. It was honestly the worst place that could have housed those kinds of patients, but that was really only the beginning of everyone's worries. Everyone who worked in this home, old or young, would all vow that the place was undoubtedly haunted. Now, usually when it comes to haunted places, there is at least one skeptic, but not here. The place was so active even veteran doctors in the 40s/50s couldn't deny the strange things that happened there, which I think says a lot about how active the building actually was. The thing that was spoken of most and seen the most was the children. It's a historical fact that 2 young children died in the home many years ago, I think around the late 1800s, of some kind of sickness when the mansion was still a family home. To my knowledge, the family didn't go on to have any more children and moved out soon after. Honestly, when I heard this story, I sort of shrugged because it was like any Victorian-era sob story, but it was a bit different when I started to come face to face with it all. My first experiences were pretty gentle, and things I easily explained away, even though I did believe in the paranormal. Things like doors slamming, footsteps, the feeling that someone was behind you, etc. are regular spooky things that most haunted homes have. That was until the buzzers began to go wild. In this specific home, we all wore pagers on our belts that were hooked onto an alarm system of buttons and pressurized mats all around the home, so if a patient pressed a button or fell onto their mat, we could be immediately alerted and could run to their aid. It was an okay system, but those mats were basically all in the wrong order, causing the pager to say room 6, but it was really room 12. It was a nightmare to keep track of. My first time around a patient's death is when I experienced the issues with the buzzers. Every time a patient got near death, buzzers would go absolutely haywire. I mean, our pagers would be sounding the alarm non-stop all around the house, literally leading workers on wild goose chases as they continuously went off one after another constantly. It sounds fake, but that's truly how we knew a patient was going to die every time. It was like a warning of some kind. And when they died, I kid you not, every time their buzzers would continue to go off for a few days before they just stopped. It was normal to me when I worked there, but looking back, I can't believe how unbelievably spooky of a thing that was. I am not making any of this up, it actually happened. At the age of 7, I fell seriously ill. I went to the hospital, and my survival was questionable. I remember perceiving a massive angel standing behind my bed before I went unconscious from blood loss. I had an anemic blood disorder a bit like hemophilia that caused uncontrollable bleeding, but I did eventually outgrow the condition. When I awoke, I was on the mend. We were poor folk, and my mom didn't always use good judgment with her kids. After I awoke, I would spend a few days in the hospital. My mom brought a board game for us to play. Of all the games she could have brought, she brought a Hasbro Ouija board. I was very excited to play, and for a 7-year-old, the rules were perfect. Put your fingers on a cursor, and all your questions will be answered. So sitting in the hospital, we played Ouija. I don't know what we asked, but it was fun and seemingly correct in the answers. Then it changed, the cursor started to go in a figure 8, and it would spell, go to hell. We paused, and another figure 8 and then go to hell again. It started to spell it a third time, but my mom flicked it off the bed and put it back in the box. Mom had bad judgment, but I am certain she wouldn't have spelled that out to me. She was immensely relieved her child was getting better, she just wouldn't do that. We never played again, I never wanted to. The picture above is the home for the next part of the story. When we got home to our house, which at that time was a converted threeplex of this huge old mansion, now we had a ghost. I never saw the ghost, but that doesn't mean it wasn't terrifying for a little kid. I wasn't a kid who had imaginary friends, I didn't see spirits. But this ghost let everybody in my family know it was there now. What it did on a very regular basis was walk up on people making unmistakable walking sounds that stopped when it got right next to you. Almost nightly for years, this thing would walk up the stairs, loudly, walk directly to my bed, stare at me for 5 to 10 minutes, walk on through the house, going to the stairs to the 3rd floor and leaving our 2nd floor. I knew instinctively not to look at it, and I never did. That was its regular routine, but it also did a lot more, involving thumps, scrapes, and occasional touching and pulling. This happened so often that, in a sense, I got used to it. But many times I ran outside and sat on the steps of this house, waiting for the morning sun. Oddly, it didn't seem malevolent, just persistent. We moved, and it stayed. Thank God. I grew up and went to work as an orderly while I attended college. I worked in the same hospital I almost died in. I regularly took bodies to the morgue. On one trip, I was certain the deceased lady was completely still there. What she felt and what she thought just streamed into me. I transported many bodies, but she was different, she was unconsciously communicating. She was disappointed that this was it for her, she felt shortchanged. Her family hadn't come, and now some kid whom she didn't like was wheeling her to the morgue. She hated that I was touching her possessions on the morgue cart. She felt cheated, very cheated by life. I prayed for her, and she was surprised I did that, and she was touched, but I noped the heck out of the morgue. She stayed. My next event is the purpose I am sharing. I am sensitive, but I don't encourage it because bad always will come through. So now, in this part, I am grown and over 21. I am also a big serious boozer, party pass-out guy, and not a very good person. Standard college butthead boy. I know I am becoming something bad, and I want to change. So it started to pray, but my original unwanted friend from the Ouija board decided to recontact me. I am praying on a regular basis, but I am still partying like every day. I am frequently choosing to pray while getting baked and drinking beer. During one of these prayers, a super creepy cold goosebumps feeling overtakes me, but for some strange reason I feel I will get an answer if I keep praying, so I continue. Then I decide, take your beer and get in the car and drive while praying. I get in the car, still very creeped out, but drinking my beer and praying. I have no plan, I am just driving aimlessly. I drive 10 to 15 miles, making random turns. I am far in the country by the Missouri River bluffs. Stop the car, and now the creepiness is completely intense and physical, but I think, just walk up the bluffs and try praying up there. Cold sweaty creepiness as I climb the bluffs. Suddenly, as I walk through waist-high weeds, I fall in a hole. The hole is 3 to 4 feet deep. I go WTF, why is there a hole in this field? I look around and see tombstones and a fence hidden in the weeds, tombstones all around me. An old abandoned family graveyard from the 1800s. I have fallen into a desecrated grave, opened by an unknown, who apparently stole the remains and bones contained in the grave. I had driven many miles and walked a very convoluted route to come to this exact location and walked directly into the grave. I would have called the police, but what would I have told them? An unknown force led me to an open grave. A few months later, the desecrated grave was discovered by the conservation department, and people have cared for this hidden graveyard ever since. The local paper was outraged, as was I. No one knew I had been the second person to be there after the desecration. Something I surely didn't want. My life changed drastically after that, but that force still hangs around. I have had a great life, profession, and family, but I still wonder about this. Other events occasionally happen, still. I am stunned when someone says an Ouija board is a ridiculous figment of imagination. Many random people are drawn to this location, and this grave is known as a supernatural location. Something in the fog. In 1982, at the height of the Cold War, my dad had been stationed at the Ramstein Air Force Base in West Germany, as we called it in those days. An officer, but not an overly high-ranking one at that time, we were allowed to live off base, and my parents thought it would be a great idea to immerse their kids into the local culture. By the time I was 11 years old, I had spent the majority of my childhood in the tiny German town of Falkenberg-Limbach, little more than a few houses clustered around two major roads that intersected at the top of a hill. It was so tiny that even people living in the next village over often wouldn't know it by name. But for the vast majority of my childhood, that small farming village nestled up amongst rolling hills, farms, and small, dense patches of forest was home. It was at that time near the beginning of spring, and fronts would move in quickly, blue skies swiftly giving way to giant, purple-tinted storm clouds that would dump rain across the landscape before moving on. Spring break was always hit or miss, sometimes falling on the warmer time of year and sometimes catching the tail end of a winter that just wouldn't let go. The spring of 1986 was somewhere in between, light, warm rains giving way to beautiful skies shot through with picturesque cottonball clouds drifting lazily overhead. While my sister, 3 years older than me, lucked out with several local boys her own age. Meanwhile, I was stuck mostly on my own, playing with my G.I. Joes in the backyard, or wandering and wondering my way out into those fields and forests, finding giant anthills and seeing how long it would take for a leaf to disappear beneath the raging insects. I had friends at school, but it was rare they would make the trip that far off base, and even rarer they'd make the journey out to my house. With the arrival of spring break, that could change. I could head in closer to the base, where more of the kids my own age lived, and spend the night, or, more rarely, they could travel out to the tiny village I lived in. Sean, like most kids in that time, was enamored with BMX biking, and we had bonded the previous summer while trying to build a quarter pipe out of scrap wood, probably not something our parents would have approved of. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to bring out his bike, so we were left to our own devices and our own two legs. Night rolled in, and we were bored of drawing in the living room. My parents were asleep upstairs, so we decided to head outside and play around in the trees around my house. The night was clear and cool, and we were playing some version of tag or hide and go seek, gradually taking us further out of town and up to the small sportplatz nestled a short distance out of town at the top of the hill. A wide, cleared section, probably a field at one point. It was roughly the size of a soccer field with a large, open structure on the far end, filled with long tables and bench seating. Originally built for town gatherings, I'm guessing, I had never actually seen it used for anything, but it was popular among the kids of the town to hang out at. It was getting late at this point, and the chilled air took on a stillness that echoed out into the forest around us. Spring insects grew silent, the little noises of animals and birds moving around at night faded away to the point Sean and I both uneasily joked about it. Even as a kid, I wasn't one to give in to supernatural beliefs. Late at night, scared of whatever was under my bed, I was as likely to crawl up under there to prove to myself nothing was lurking as to hide cowering under my sheets. But something that night was different. Where before we had been running out 50 yards or so into the dark woods around the field to hide, waiting for the other to find us, we suddenly found good reasons to stick to the better lit portions of the field itself. The stars gave way to clouds, a dark gray mat pulling itself across the sky, the air becoming thicker and more humid. Is that fog? I looked back towards the town, letting my eyes follow along the road winding its way between a cow field on one side and trees on the other. Sure enough, sometime during our games, a fog bank had rolled in, enshrouding Falkenberg-Limbach and turning the few streetlights into a distant, vaguely yellowish glow. Yeah, I said. Maybe we should head back, getting late. We joked as we left the field, making our way along the single-lane road towards town, but the jokes dried away as we rounded the corner. More than a light fog, it was like someone had drawn a smoke-soaked wall around the village, even the glow from the streetlights seemingly swallowed whole. Misty at the edges, the trees to our left and the field to our right receded from reality, pulling back into the thick fog until only the edges of the road were visible. Sean and I were silent now, and we both ended up tossing looks over our shoulders, the hairs on the back of my neck refusing to go down, pins and needles playing their way from the base of my neck clear down my spine. Something was following us. Quietly. At first, it wasn't obvious. I think we both felt it but didn't say anything, not wanting to look weak in front of the other, I guess. But we'd take steps, and there'd be echoes, a rustle, a half second behind our own, not an echo, but maybe something trying to mask itself by matching our pace. Something scratched against the asphalt, and I turned around, walking backwards. You hear that? Yeah. Sean was frowning, looking over his shoulder. The bushes by the side of the road, probably 10 yards distant but lost in the white folds of the fog, rustled. Sean and I both glanced at each other, any semblance of bravado draining away. Somehow, walking back through the dense trees, swallowed in darkness and the fog, to the back door of my house didn't seem like such a good idea anymore. We turned right, taking a small, unnamed road that ran steep and straight to the main road in town. It was quick, but either side of the road gave way to deep gullies, and there were no lights. What seemed like a good idea first began to turn ugly, even a few steps down. The rustling stopped but was replaced by clicking, a sound similar to hooves on pavement. The problem was there weren't enough clicks for something with 4 legs, and it wasn't moving right. There would be a few clicks, distant at first, just a couple stitched together, enough to let us know there was something there, just out of sight. Then silence. Then a few more steps. Closer. We were trotting now, not running, not yet, but the nervous laughter had dried up sometime at the top of the hill. We made it to Hohenstrasse, the big road through town, and the safety of its street lights, spaced with German efficiency every 20 yards. But the glow did little to cut through the fog, the lights themselves little more than dull, distant orange globes floating up in the gloom. If anything, the fog was thicker down here, chopping the world neatly off at about 10 feet. Always aware of cars, especially fast-moving ones out here in the German countryside, we moved to the sidewalk, aware it brought us closer to the hedgerows and towering dark shadows of the trees. We felt we had left whatever was behind, slowed our pace, and even laughed a little. Then the bushes next to us rustled, far too close and moving with us. I might have yelled, I don't know if Sean did, but we started running. The clicking footsteps returned, something playing with us, keeping up with us but staying cunningly just within the grasp of the fog, safely out of sight. Maybe mercifully out of sight. And the house was locked up, only the back door, nestled as it was behind a thick pocket of trees with no lights, the way Sean and I had left, was unlocked. Not much of a choice, we sprinted off the safety of the road and plunged into the garden by the side of the garage, shoving our way through the hedge and into the backyard, whatever was behind us pushed along the trees just beyond. We slammed into the back door, sliding it open and ramming it shut behind us, both of us spinning to look back. It was only fog. Just fog, rolling through the backyard, nothing else there. Both Sean and I seemed to realize that the living room and the back door itself were all glass, huge floor-to-ceiling picture glass windows, and all around was that fog, the trees of the backyard making a wall of dark gray that anything could have been hiding in. We backed out of the room and shut that door, too. I don't think either of us slept that night. Even now, over 30 years later, I still joke it was just a cow that got out of its pen, or maybe my sister's German boyfriend, or even one of his friends. I try to imagine any number of rational explanations, but nothing quite explains how it felt being out there that night. It doesn't explain the sound of hooves on pavement or the way it seemed to be stalking us. Playing with us. Recurring nightmares and doors opening on their own. So this happened 7 years ago when my boyfriend first moved to my college town to be close to me while I finished my degree. He moved from several states away with just a carload of stuff to his name, so once he rented an apartment, he needed to go buy a bunch of stuff to furnish it. Being broke young people, we went to a second-hand store to find him pots and pans, furniture, etc. After we got a cartload of the essentials, we started looking up and down the home decor aisles, laughing at all the strange or way outdated knickknacks people had donated to the store. I was bound and determined to make his new apartment feel like home, seeing as I convinced him to move over 2,000 miles to be close to me, so I insisted we pick something out to hang on the wall. We both decided on a silly decorative brass plate we found that had an embossed image of what looked like pilgrims eating a Thanksgiving feast at a long table. We got back to his bare apartment and started setting up, ceremoniously hanging the brass plate on the wall in the hallway across from the front door, which ran between the kitchen/living area on one end of the apartment and the bedroom on the other end. That night, I had a really creepy dream where I woke up in the dark apartment bedroom, lying down next to my sleeping boyfriend on the air mattress, facing the bedroom door, which was closed. In the dream, the handle on the door turned, and the door swung open into the bedroom, exposing the dark hallway. End of dream. I woke up the next morning, sort of wigged out by the dream, but didn't mention anything about it. I continued to have this same dream of waking up laying in the dark room, watching the door open, and exposing the dark hallway on and off over the next several weeks, but I have an overactive imagination and cycle through weeks of nightmares, so I shrugged it off as nothing out of the ordinary. One night, the dream escalated. It started the same, watching the door open and seeing from my sleeping position a fraction of the dark hallway, but this night my perspective started to float from my bed position to in front of the door, so I was able to see down the dark hallway. I saw a dark figure standing at the end of the hallway. I woke up freaking out and woke my boyfriend up to comfort me and explain the recurring dreams. He looked shocked and admitted he had been having the same dream too. We both kind of shook it off as a coincidence due to living in a new, unfamiliar place, and went back to sleep. Another night, I had the same dream, then woke panicking from the leftover bad feelings of the dream. As I lay there trying to calm myself back down to sleep, I watched the door swing open. I flipped out, woke my boyfriend up, told him what happened, and forced him to go check the apartment, which was of course empty. He talked me down, and we went back to sleep. Later that week I stayed at the college overnight for a project, so he slept alone in the apartment. The next day he called me and told me he had experienced the door swinging open on him too when he woke up from the dream. Nothing else ominous happened besides the creepy dreams and the door opening on its own, so we never addressed the problem further than nervously joking about the haunted apartment. Fast forward, his 6-month lease ends, and he moves into a house we are subletting from friends near our campus. He brings all his belongings with him, naturally, including the innocuous brass plate. Cue the same type of creepy dream, except this time set in the new house. We laugh about it and ignore it. This same thing continues to happen as he hopscotches around the state, doing the young person's let's move a lot thing. He moves. Creepy dreams ensue. And on. We start to talk about the phenomenon when he has been living in a brand new mother-in-law home on his landlord's property. We are still having weird dreams, and doors are opening on their own, but now this is a new home, so leftover ghosties from previous tenants is not realistic. In discussing possibilities, we both agree that the stupid brass plate we bought a couple years ago is one of the common factors between all these little paranormal experiences. So, when he goes to move again when his lease is up, he very purposefully leaves the brass plate behind on a shelf in the garage of this home. Dreams stop. Creepy paranormal stuff no longer happens. Problem solved. Goodbye, weird cursed object brass plate, and sorry to the new tenant who gets to start having creepy dreams. Since then, we on and off reminisce and joke about the haunted brass plate and recap the experiences we both have to confirm. Yeah, we still remember the same stuff, so we must not have made it up. I can't explain this, but I used to be skeptical about ghosts, jinn, demons in Islam, or the evil eye, and this changed my mind. I've always heard voices in my room, and it drove me crazy trying to figure out where they were coming from. It felt like people were stalking me at night through my window. I also heard whispers when I was about to do something, as if they were trying to make me go insane. When I was sleeping, I often felt like someone woke me up by shoving me. This happened several times, which confirmed my suspicions. Someone even opened my AirPods once. I also saw eyes staring at me from the roof while I was trying to sleep. I couldn't believe my eyes, and I let it go. After about a year, I took dates with a lid of a pot, and it started shaking by itself. I recorded it, and it moved more than once. Despite seeing this, I foolishly ate 2 of the dates that had stood on their own. Later that night, I felt something making me smile and move my chin up and down while I slept. I recorded myself and saw it really happening and something black moving under my eyelid with the camera zooming in and out like it was trying to glitch the camera. It was terrifying, and I deleted it quickly. I started praying, and most of the disturbances stopped, but I still feel something moving in my left eye. When I read the Quran before sleeping, it gets weaker, but it bothers me and moves my eye whenever I close it if I don't pray or listen to the Quran. I listened to the Quran during the day, and my sweat turned into something like a black string coming out of my body. I realized my problem might be the evil eye because I had symptoms but never believed in it. The voices I heard could be black magic because I hear them when I pray or listen to ruqyah, Islamic recitations. I also smelled weird, bad odors when I was alone, which made me think I'm a target. Lately, while sleeping with my brothers, I felt a strong, repeated flash like a camera taking pictures. I opened my eyes and saw it happening. I turned on the light, and it stopped. Now, I struggle with unbalanced walking and movements, like something is controlling me. Whatever I put down is shaking for a moment. Sometimes when I try to catch or reach something, I miss it. Also, I feel something is touching my private area, and it works with my thoughts, like whenever I like it, it's making a real erection. Also, I feel tingles on my body. I think the voices are due to black magic, and whatever is inside me is serving that magic, based on some of my research and help from Islam and black magic symptoms. I appreciate any insights, thanks. I experienced a glitch while driving. Alright, this is going to sound absolutely bonkers and unbelievable, but then again, if we could physically prove anything we share online, then we would be a lot more interesting. This past Thanksgiving weekend I drove from Toronto to NYC via Niagara Falls with 2 other people. After we successfully crossed the border, the map app redirected us to take the streets. As I was driving through town, a really strong feeling of nostalgia hit me. A feeling like I've been there before. As we were driving, I recognized landmarks that I had never ever seen before in my life. It was such a surreal feeling. One of the people traveling with me woke up and asked what town we were in, and I answered immediately, yet right now I can't remember the name of the town. What stands out was the weather, though. When she asked me that, all I remember from that moment was looking around, and it all seemed sort of distorted. Like a gray sepia filter with color on a rainy day, if that makes sense. What absolutely ducked with my mind were the people on the street corner we came across. I stopped at the stop sign, and as I was waiting for people to cross, one of them looked at me and gave me the "it's you look." She tapped the person she was with, and he gave me the same look. I saw them keep looking as I was driving away. Oddly enough, I felt I had seen those 2 before, though the further I drove away from them, the less the feeling got. In fact, after leaving the town, my entire feeling of nostalgia and familiarity left me as quick as it came. When we drove back, we didn't go through that town again. Not from lack of trying either, because I would love to remember the name of the town and maybe get out to try and figure out what's going on. Any ideas as to what happened? I'm a 32-year-old man from and currently live in Cumberland County, New Jersey, which puts me about 45 minutes away from Philadelphia and 45 minutes away from the Atlantic Ocean, while at the same time being only about 15 minutes away from Delaware Bay. After high school I went into the Army as an intelligence analyst for a while. Then when I got out I moved to NYC and worked as a project manager for a construction company until I met my wife and decided to move back to New Jersey to be closer to our family since she was pregnant with our daughter. That's just some background for me. So this happened in October of 2018. It was about 11:45 at night, and I decided to go on my front steps to smoke a couple of cigarettes before I tried to fall asleep. Everybody else in the house was already sleeping. It was a pretty clear night without many clouds in the sky, but there was some fog on the ground. As I was smoking, I was looking at the fog, and to me it looked like there was movement in it. I know it sounds crazy, but it was almost like there were invisible/camouflage things out there that I wouldn't be able to see if it wasn't for the fog hanging on the ground. As I was looking at the fog, I noticed this white truck that had driven by twice at this point. I could hear a woman and man yelling at each other when the truck stops at the stop sign in front of my house, and the woman gets out screaming at the man, then slams the door as he pulls off fast, then proceeds to walk into the woods across the street from me, which is really weird because there isn't anything back there except for blue holes until you hit the bay. If I walk out of my front door and just keep walking straight, there won't be any houses or civilization at all, only trees and artificial lakes, blue holes, left over from sand plants until you hit the Delaware Bay. So at this point, it's been about 5 minutes since the woman walked into the woods when things started going from weird to absolutely unbelievably scary, strange, and the most reality-shattering thing that has ever happened to me. I'm still looking at the movement that I'm seeing in the fog when I hear this very loud noise come from the woods that sounded like metal being ripped apart. There really isn't a good example I can give for that sound because it was so unearthly. I'm sure it wasn't a natural sound. That sound lasted for about 10 to 15 seconds, then abruptly stopped and was replaced with a different sound, which I could feel more than I could hear. Imagine being aware that there's a huge sound happening by you but is out of the frequency that your ears can hear. That's the best way I can describe it. This sound is a constant through the rest of this experience. This is the point where I will probably lose some people, and I'm aware of how crazy this all sounds, but as I'm getting adjusted to the sound, it feels like something reaches out to me mentally in my own head but does so without words and only conveys a feeling of calm and a heads up or warning for what's about to happen. It kind of felt like whatever it was feeling me out to see how I would react to what I was currently experiencing, like a security check. As I was having this feeling of calm conveyed to me, I noticed a light in the sky that seemed to have risen out of the woods, I would say about 5 or 6 miles away from me. At this point it's only a ball of light in the distance, but I just knew that it was coming right towards me, although it wasn't moving very fast. Right after I noticed the light in the sky is when I start to get really freaked out more than I've ever been in my life. In the woods across the street from me, which is no more than 50 yards, all these orbs of light start to appear. I could see some that seemed to flicker into existence. These orbs were all white light, which didn't light up the area around them like what you would expect from flashlights. There were probably about 12 to 16 of them, which moved in a totally smooth manner. Besides the trail to get into the woods, the area is so dense and invested with stickerthorn bushes that it simply wouldn't be possible for people to move where the lights were moving, let alone do it completely smooth. I really am positive that they weren't people with flashlights because of the area and the characteristics of the light orbs themselves. So I'm just watching the orbs move around for about a minute, trying to make sense of what it is I'm seeing when I look back up to the sky to find a craft coming practically right towards me, with it only being about 1,000 yards away at this point. So I'm going back and forth looking at the orbs on the ground and the craft, which I start to make out better. It was flying very low. I'd say it was only about 3.5 to 4 stories off the ground. I see the path it's taking and see it's going to pass right in front of me at an angle in which I'll be able to see underneath the craft and the side of it at the same time. The craft was a single-story dull black rectangle. I could see underneath the craft and saw that the rectangle was made up of 3 smaller rectangle panels that fit together to form a larger rectangle. I clearly saw that the craft was made up of 3 panels. The size is a harder estimate, but I would say it was about 35 yards long and 20 yards across. Underneath there were lights flashing in a pattern that would cycle through, then cycle back the other way. In the moment, I thought that the craft was signaling to the orbs on the ground. It didn't make any sound at all, and all I was hearing was the same buzzing/humming noise that I felt more than I heard. While it was in front of me, it was moving really slowly, to the point where I don't think a plane with a normal propulsion system could even stay in the air at that speed. I take my eyes off the craft and look back down at the orbs, which are still moving all around, though one was starting to cross the street in front of me. I only took my eyes off the craft for a moment when I looked at the orbs, but when I looked back, the craft was gone. For whatever reason, when I saw the craft just vanish like that, the reality of what I was seeing really hit home, and I got scared, to be honest with you, since my daughter, wife, and mom were all no more than 50 feet away from all of this craziness I was watching, so I went inside and locked the doors. I just felt like I'd be willing to investigate more if it was just my life I was playing with, but I wasn't willing to take that chance with my family lives. I could have just been paranoid at this point, but I felt like I was being watched for the next 2 hours. I didn't have any lost time from this event, and the entire thing happened only over a period of 20 to 30 minutes. Go back on the event now, I question what exactly was going on with the white truck and the woman who walked into the woods at the beginning of this story. I've also done some research and found that there are a good number of reports of people seeing a glimmering man in the woods, which makes me think of the movement I was seeing in the fog. Where I live is a very active area for UFO phenomenon, which makes sense if something wanted to have access to major cities like Philadelphia, NYC, Baltimore, and DC. What could possibly be a better place to hide than almost inaccessible 1,000-foot deep lakes in the middle of the woods? I've told this story a couple of times and just want to keep getting it out there as it needs to be read/listened to too. Bicester, UK. I had a strange experience 12 years ago where I had this fascination out of the blue of UFOs and felt the need to sit out and look for them. I was 14 at the time, and UFOs or aliens I had never thought about before. I couldn't have cared less at that age either. The next day forced some of my family to sit in the garden with me under the stars on an amazing clear evening, and we were sat talking for about 10 minutes when I noticed a strange white light just like a spotlight that you would get in your kitchen, not bright but dull in color. As if it were attached to something? Like an oval in shape. This is how I knew it was attached. This light slowly moved over the houses to the left of us with no noise and stopped right in front of us, probably 100 feet in the air and probably 200 feet away. Now this is where it gets weird. I feel this strange feeling erupt in my chest like an adrenaline rush. But wasn't. I felt like I had lost a sense of time and was almost as if I were unconscious. But at the same time I was fixated on this light, but it was not actually there with my body. It's difficult to explain. All of a sudden the light brightens, and as best as I can describe, it pings at a speed and acceleration I have never seen in my life. 0 to 20,000 miles per hour maybe. Seriously fast, still no noise. I lost track of it for a second, then something made me look up into the sky above, and I noticed the white light miles and miles up. As small as a star and then zip into space, leaving a small trail of light behind it like a comet. My family had said nothing the whole time. We all looked at each other after, and no one could say anything. I think everyone was beyond frightened that an object like that exists. Anyone else seen something similar? It was in 1971, I was in my late 20s. I was then staying in Rose Hill, Mauritius, not married yet and staying at my folks'. One day, my dad came home with a South African couple. He met them while coming back home, and they were tourists visiting Mauritius with their backpacks, tents, and sleeping bags. Mauritius was still safe in that period, but independence was given by Great Britain in 1968, and a civil war had just come to an end a few months before. Two communities had fought for some political reasons. Anyway, my dad invited them home to sleep over for a few days. I remember the guy had a big blonde beard. He was very kind, his wife was as well, but I forgot her face. We decided to organize camping during a weekend on the west coast of Mauritius, in a place called Flick en Flack. This place, which is now pretty developed, was at that time very wild with just a few houses. We went on a Saturday morning, found a nice place to put a tent, and organized the day. The South African man and his wife were very good swimmers and divers. We spent a lot of time in the sea, catching fish, crabs, and some lobsters, which were getting scarce then, we don't find them anymore by the coast, and cooked all these goodies on a small homemade barbecue set. All of us, Mom, Dad, the couple, and I really enjoyed the day. The sunset was beautiful, it was warm, we were in the summer, and everything was perfect. When night came, we prepared a nice barbecue with chicken, beef, pork, and a few shrimp we had caught earlier. The night was starry, my dad was happy and drunk, and the couple was obviously having a great time. Since we were not fluent in English, I was improving then, communication was a bit difficult, but we could make ourselves understand with gestures and sometimes drawing on the sand. It was great fun seeing my dad trying to converse with them with a very limited knowledge of English. Anyway, it must have been around 9 p.m. We were all seated on the beach, watching the ocean as well as the starry sky by the campfire. It was so beautiful. Then we started to hear like a complaint. We could not determine the origin of the sound, but it was like a woman wailing. It was faint but clear since the place we were was wild and remote. The wailing was not constant, but would be heard from time to time. We put it on the sound of some sort of animal, since we were not people living on the coast, thus being ignorant of animals that could be active at night. We were seated on the beach facing the ocean when suddenly, we noticed someone coming out from the sea on our left, about 30 to 40 meters away. It looked like a woman with a long white dress just walking from the sea to the beach. We could not see her face but could guess she had long hair. The only lights were the stars and our bonfire. She silently walked straight and disappeared from our view in the vegetation. We found this very odd. I knew it was not normal but did not know what the others were thinking. My dad was drunk and watched the scene with a little smile on his face. I think he was lost in his thoughts. We all looked at each other and did not know what to think. I tried to check if there was a house where the woman walked. I just stood up and walked towards the sea and looked on my left to see where she went. There was only green, bush, and trees. There were no lights or any construction around. I was now scared because I was realizing that we must have seen a ghost. I walked back to the bonfire and sat and told everyone that I did not find any house there. We stopped talking, and everyone kept alert. We could now hear all the little noises of the night. We heard faint crackling like someone or an animal quietly walking on dry leaves. Then suddenly we heard a loud flapping noise on a tree nearby. It looked like large birds, pigeons or bats, flying away. It scared us. Then my mom told me quietly that she felt that something was not right. I and she were feeling watched. The couple was looking around with their glass in their hands. Then, suddenly, something heavy fell in front of us on the beach at about 5 to 6 meters. I stood up to see what it was but could not find anything. Everybody stood up and looked around. Nothing was found. Despite the fact that the night was clear and sweet, the atmosphere had changed. Apart from my father, who was on a trip because he was too drunk, we were all scared by then. The couple talked between them, and I could not understand. They seemed quite concerned about the situation. I did not know what to do. Could we stay there, maybe go to sleep, or maybe we had to leave? That was a pity. We were enjoying such a nice time before seeing that woman. Then, in the middle of the night, we heard this bone-chilling scream like a woman being attacked. It seemed close to our camp. We were on our feet with eyes about to pop out from their sockets. My heart was pounding so loudly that I thought others could hear it. The couple started to pick up their stuff, and my dad followed them. Mom and I packed away everything quickly. As we were doing so, some coconuts fell and rolled on our camp as if someone had thrown them away. We were now scared to death, and no one would talk. We heard running on the beach then in the woods but could not see anything. We quickly put stuff in the car, and it was not easy because we did not have a big car and we had taken time to pack things so that they could fit in when we came down. Now we had to pile up things. The worst was the barbecue. It was hot and dirty, and we did not want to leave it. I burned myself twice while trying to put it away. While we were packing away, things were happening around us. The screams seemed to originate from different places, and there was a lot of noise going on. We all got into the car practically one upon the other with stuff on us. I decided to take the wheel because my dad was too drunk. As we moved away, we got a shock. We saw a woman dressed in white standing by the little lane looking at us. It was bone-chilling. I stopped the car. She was standing about 4 to 5 meters away. I did not know what to do. I was too scared to move closer to her, but it was the only way out. We waited a few minutes as she was standing there staring at us. I heard my mom praying and the South African couple mumbling something between them. Suddenly, we heard a bang like something hit the car behind. We all turned to see what had happened. The atmosphere was very tense, and I think my dad was becoming sober very quickly. He was now swearing. We did not see anything behind, but when I looked forward, the woman was not there anymore. But the scariest thing happened. She was now standing by my door, looking at me. I can't describe the utter fear that took hold of me then. I released a scream, my throat was sore several days later, and pushed the gas pedal. I think everybody screamed then. But with panic, the car choked, and the woman was still there looking at us. I remember not seeing her eyes or features because it was dark. I switched on the car again and drove off as fast as I could. The poor car got shaken on the dirt road. We reached the main road relieved and shouting. What the hell had we seen and experienced? Fortunately, Rose Hill is not far from Flick and Flack, but when we reached the town, the car broke down. The fan belt of the car had broken, and the engine stopped overheating. We were in the 70s, no cell or any towing services were available a Saturday evening. The couple and my mom walked home, which was not far. My dad and I stayed by the car. At home, Mom phoned a friend of my dad who was not staying far to tow away our car. We finally reached home at around 11:30 p.m., completely exhausted. My dad's friend who had helped us was invited to have coffee, and we told him what had happened. Then he said that this place in Flick and Flack was haunted, and several people encountered that woman. He said that we were lucky because there had been accounts of people walking to the sea like being in a trance and never coming back, getting drowned by possession, really scary and unbelievable. Some would be hurt by objects being thrown at them. A woman apparently lost her baby while being pregnant. She was a few weeks away from delivery, but after coming to that place and seeing the ghost, she had pain in her tummy and started to bleed a few hours later. She had to go through surgery, where they noted that the baby had died. These events would not always happen but would take place randomly. The South African couple stayed 2 more days at home and left. We never saw or heard of them afterwards. I later discovered that there was a cemetery on the other side of the road, not too close to the road though. I never knew who that woman/ghost was, but it seemed that regularly she would come out of the ocean and walk to the cemetery. However, in the late 80s, there were no accounts of seeing her up to today. I think that the urban development has made it/her change her plans. I've been lurking the entirety here for months. At any rate, I mention this only because I'm afraid it'll make my experience I'm sharing here unbelievable. I'm telling the truth, and you'll believe that when you find out it's not that sensational. But definitely weird. I love scented candles. Everyone who knows me well knows this. People often buy me candles as gifts, and I often receive several at a time. Whenever I receive candles of different scents, I'll light one candle one day, another scent another day, and so forth so I can sample them all. I always do this, without fail. About a month ago, my husband surprised me with 2 candles he'd bought from a coworker who was helping her daughter with a fundraiser. One was nutmeg, the other apple pie. I distinctly remember lighting the nutmeg first and the apple pie the following day. I liked the smell of the nutmeg better, so the apple pie candle was put on the shelf for the time being. Today, I decided I wanted to light the apple pie candle for a change. I got it off the shelf, opened the lid, and it appeared to have never been burned before. The wax was at the top, the wicks were pure white. It's a 2-wick candle, ladies and gentlemen. I know I let that candle burn for several hours a few weeks ago. I've had some paranormal experiences in my day, and it's going to take more than that to freak me completely out. I lit it up, and nothing came out of the smoke to grant me 3 wishes or anything. My experiences are limited to things disappearing and reappearing around the house or hearing strange noises. Those things happened in other houses. By the way, this is foreign to me. Has anyone had anything like this happen? I've heard of something called time slips. Has anyone heard of this? Examples are hard to explain, like when you're sure something happened, like someone was at an event you attended, or something particular happened at said event, but when you're remembering it with friends, they swear what you're remembering did not happen. It's like we're slipping in and out of dimensions. In this dimension, I did not light the candle. I'm remembering the dimension where I did. I'm sorry if y'all are disappointed in my story. I know it's not a very good story because it's true. Believe me, if I just wanted to write a scary story, I could have. I'm truly interested in your opinions, and I'd love to hear if anyone else has had an experience like this. Missing time, encounters with otherworldly beings, strange sightings, messages from beyond, never before shared. I have never found a place to share my experiences before now. I have told friends and family, but no one truly believed me or wanted to anyway. I would have checked myself into a psychiatric ward by now if these things had happened to just me alone, but one other person was with me each time, the same person. The man I feel is my soulmate, even more than that. But circumstances have made sure we only were able to spend a couple of years together before separating, and it seems impossible we will ever reunite again. I have accepted to live my life without having true love after seeing how impossible it has been made for us. Anyway, back to the incidents that occurred during our relationship. We were together every hour of the day from September 2012 to September 2013. It seems like 10 years have passed, yet there has only been one incident. The first incident was September 24, 2012. We had just rededicated our lives to the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and I specifically prayed to receive knowledge and see the truth. Boy, did I ever get an answer to those prayers. A constant flow of information was in my face every day. Certain books, scriptures, websites, etc. were just there. Every way I turned was new information on so many things. Mostly end times. Well, the night of September 24th, my kids and I lived next door to my grandmother, in the house I had grown up in with my parents, who had passed away when I was 13 and 18. My guy, I'll call him Jay, had just moved in with us after leaving Nashville. He was is a singer/songwriter. My daughter, age 4 then, was asleep already, and my son, age 8, was still awake. We were watching Jay sing and play his acoustic guitar like we usually did. Then Jay and I went to smoke a cigarette on the back steps, and were looking at the sky as always. He spotted a bright white orb and called my son to look. As Jay moved his hand side to side, the orb mocked his movements, and we were in disbelief. We proceeded to go to the front porch to look at the sky from there and saw a bright green orb there, very low and close. I was able to get pictures and a video of it. Then we went back inside with kids. That's when all hell broke loose. All of a sudden there were buzzing noises, like electrical currents, heard right outside the back door, so we ran to the front. The door would not open, even with both of our hands trying, and then the buzzing started at that door. Then a louder buzzing, scraping noise started too, and we were terrified, running from one door to the other, not able to get out, and too scared to jump out windows with kids. My daughter was still sleeping somehow, but my son was bawling, and I said everyone pray, so we huddled together and all prayed aloud through tears, and suddenly my daughter sat straight up out of her sleep and said, "Papa, Danny said front door now, go." Danny was my dad's name, whom she had never met before he died. So I picked her up, Jay picked my son up, and we ran out the front door across the yard to my grandmother's house and banged on the door. My 16-year-old brother lived with her, so he was up and opened the door quickly as we rushed in. I woke up my grandmother, and they both said they heard nothing. After a few minutes, we checked sky again, and white orb was still there. We even got them to go out and see that for themselves, but we went right back in. We stayed there the rest of the night and needed to go get cigarettes but tried once before daylight and heard a crash in bushes beside the house. Soon as we stepped off her porch and about killed each other by running back into the house when daylight broke, we finally got to the car and went to the store. When we got back, we noticed chemtrails surrounding the property, all in the shape of X's. 4 in total. The whole day there were power surges making the lights go out and back on, but we didn't contact the power company because my grandmother chalked it up to someone wrecking into a pole somewhere near, etc. That is, until about 2 p.m. that day, a serviceman just showed up from our electric company, and when we asked why he was there, he said because their main office in Raleigh, North Carolina, had alerts on their system of intense power surges from this address, our address. We live near Florence, South Carolina, but miles and miles out in the country. We told the man what we experienced but got the "are you insane" look, and he proceeded to climb the pole to see what was really causing it. When he came down, all he could do was scratch his head and shake his head in disbelief or confusion because he said it looked like someone or something must have been yanking with great force to get the top metal piece to move like that and was barely still there because it was about to be yanked off, and then our power would have been lost immediately. But only to the house we were in because my grandmother had a separate line to her house untouched. As he was moving the power line, I recognized the scraping and zapping like electrical sound we had heard the second time and felt sick. Whatever it was almost had us. He said there was no sign of debris etc. that could have come close to causing that type of damage and had no other explanation, but wasn't looking at me like a nut anymore either. After he left we thought about the video and pictures and went to look at them but couldn't find them in my gallery. The weird thing is they weren't just gone, like what happens when something is deleted from a phone or camera and just is no longer there anymore. There was something there, a blank white screen with nothing but the words "this image can no longer be found." So, what happened that night, and who removed the video and pictures from my phone? The government or whatever was out there? Something had to help us get away. That white orb remained in the sky several nights with 2 or 3 more around it, but no other incidents. Maybe the green one meant harm and others didn't. I never had anything like that happen to me, and there is no way it didn't happen because my kid even went through it. He took years to get over it. After that, strange things kept happening, but mostly only to me and Jay. We were never under the influence of substances such as acid or LSD. I wish I could say I was high, then maybe I could understand it better. I've always known I wasn't like other people. My childhood has a lot of missing time, and my teenage years also. I can remember being in elementary school and being able to watch myself walking around with my friends from above us, but as I got older, I stopped separating from myself because it felt so strange and I was afraid I was going to die or something. That is one memory I think of a lot. Other vivid memories I do have my sister says never happened, that's another thing, no way I could imagine the memories I do have. So many other things happened to Jay and me during that year, I can't go through them all. Some just because I feel I can't. We lost time almost every night, at least every few nights, and some days. A trip to Florence takes 35 minutes, and one day we left and drove straight there, no stops, and next thing we knew it was enormous hours later. We talked the entire way and felt like 20 minutes, but the clock read over 3 hours from the time we left home. We were headed to Nashville that day, an 8-hour, at most with 3 stops, trip. When we arrived and figured up our time, it had taken us 14 hours and it only stopped twice. The guy expecting us was worried because he hadn't reached us for hours. I remember the trip there was crazy because of things we watched happening in the night sky. Like certain stars were at war and switching places with each other. Sounds Looney Tunes but true. And last one and hardest one for you to believe, probably because I still don't understand how or why only me and him saw this. On December 21, 2012, sure you know the date because of the Mayan calendar and prophecies surrounding it, we were watching the night sky as usual, not really expecting anything because we never knew what to expect, prophecy or not. Anyway, at 2 a.m., we were on the back porch smoking cigarettes, and the moon was directly above us in the center of the sky, so we went inside to grab a lighter and decided to go back out except to the front porch. By the time I got there, I watched the moon falling from about 3 feet above the tree line as if it were setting, but rapidly and was huge, orange, and bright, like when you see a full moon rising but only much bigger. I watched as it went from say 3 or 4 moon sizes above the tree line to completely disappearing behind the tree line, then it was just gone. We were in the house, maybe 1 minute for it to drop from the center of the sky to where it was when I walked out the front door, and within 5 or 10 seconds it was gone. It was so dark and cold. I freaked out and started praying because I knew the world was ending and was just waiting on a collision of some sort because it looked like that was what was happening. I got on Facebook and started posting, "Did anyone see that?" etc., etc., and no one knew what I was talking about. All they could see was that the moon was gone. It had been out earlier that night, but nothing else. Someone even said, "Duh, the planets aligned tonight, but I'm not sure to be able to witness it like that." I even looked up mass hysteria, but it was unheard of for just 2 of us. I searched online, but nothing. Nowhere. I still search it. Even past 2 days I have been since I started researching the Mandela effect, but still, nothing. I have seen more, but these are the major ones that I need answers for. I mean, why me? Who am I? Why could we see it but no one else? Along with other things, I rarely experience things like that anymore, not without him. Only a few times have I been through phenomenal experiences like that alone. I last saw him in March 2015. He went to jail last August and has tried calling me every day since, but I don't accept the calls. He broke my trust and betrayed my loyalty, and I don't easily forgive. Even after all we went through, I can't go back to that right now. I honestly feel like we are SPSD to be together in more than this reality but think we are too much for this reality to handle together. I understand, but sometimes it's the little things that cause you to pause and reflect. He always said the GVMT watched him, and maybe so, maybe me too. My life path number is 3, and I was born 3:33 a.m., which I have had tattooed on my wrist in Roman numerals since 2013 when we were last together. Well, late 2014, almost exactly a year later, I applied for a free government phone that comes with a preset phone number, and guess what the last 4 digits are? 3330, coincidence, maybe. But not so sure after all I've been through the past few years. Anyway, that's some of my story. I know it is long but didn't want to leave out any details.